Hello everyone and welcome to the WRA interview. My name is Sandil Sandmagam and I am the Portfolio Director for the World Refining Association. COVID-19 has generated both social and economic uncertainty, and given that many of our network is still in lockdown, we thought it would be great to provide you some industry insights whilst at home. Today we have with us Dr. Bashir Dabbousi, Director of Technology, Strategy and Planning at Saudi Aramco. Bashir was the Interim Vice President of Research at the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Centre, KAPSARC, an independent energy, economics and policy think tank in Riyadh, from 2008 to 2012. He has occupied several administrative and technical positions in Saudi Aramco, including as a senior consultant, part of the Strategic Transformation Office and coordinator of the R&D Division in the Research and Development Centre. Bashir has received 22 US patents and co-authored many publications in refereed journals. So Bashir, with that lovely introduction, putting Aramco aside, how is the lockdown environment treating you and your family?
Thank you, Sandil. It's really a pleasure to be talking to you, and I'd like to, of course, express my deepest sympathy to everybody who's been afflicted by the COVID pandemic, and wish everybody who's been infected speedy recovery, and hope that we will get through this together. In terms of my personal experience with the pandemic, it's meant that I've been working from home for 2 months and gotten to see my kids quite a bit, a lot more than they actually want to see me. And it's been really an eye-opener.
And from a business perspective, how has COVID-19 impacted Saudi Aramco to date?
So Sandil, what I think is important to note is that Saudi Aramco is a very resilient company. We were extremely resilient earlier in the attacks, terrorist attacks on our facilities, earlier in 2019, in which production was recovered within several weeks, a few weeks, actually sooner than originally promised. 5 million barrels of oil production were impacted and immediately recovered within weeks. And COVID has not been that much different. In fact, the company had in place well in advance, emergency preparedness plans for a pandemic. It was part of risks that we were assessing for the company. It became now a top corporate risk, in fact, and the plans for addressing pandemics has become a major area for us. But what I'd like to note is that during the pandemic, our production continued. There was no drop in our production whatsoever. All of our customers received their shipments. In fact, we, during this pandemic, also increased our production. And so the company as a whole has not missed a step, both in the upstream, in our downstream, in delivering refined products. And in terms of our employees and our activities, we've been continuously working. We've been delivering on all the targets that we've set, and we've really continued to generate value for the company and for our shareholders.
And looking forward, do you think that COVID is going to be here for the long term and pose some bigger challenges going forward? And also, do you foresee a change in behavior due to the way, or the new way we're going to be working?
So COVID, is not gone yet. In fact, the number of cases around the world are still increasing. And pandemics are now believed or perceived as a reality that the world has to deal with. And of course, our company and a lot of major companies in the world are really cementing plans on how to function in a pandemic. But they're also opening their eyes to a lot more of a new business model or a new business opportunity, which allows people to function remotely. Somebody was highlighting that a lot of the digitalization and fourth industrial revolution technologies that companies were adopting were really accelerate quite significantly during the pandemic. And in fact, the companies that had started adopting this type of remote and digital technologies were the ones that were able to really keep their business alive and keep the pace. Now, as a company, a lot of our functions, at least the people that are in the front lines, that are in the production facilities and in the refining facilities, they need to physically come to work. But the functions that do not require physical presence, we found a new norm, and we found a way that we can hold meetings across the globe, as I'm calling you right now from Saudi Arabia, where we can actually, switch, click a button and go from a call in Asia to a call in China to a call in Europe and then North America, and it's really made us a lot more efficient. Reduction of travel time, reduction of transients, and so on. And I think we're getting a lot of, I would say, contact and collaborative efforts off the ground in a much faster manner.
Yeah, thank you. And before COVID, at the end of 2019, many companies were looking to reduce their emissions from their operations. Of course, COVID has done that with everyone in lockdown, naturally. But is this something that Aramco is doing or will continue to do?
Well, Sandil, actually, Aramco, and this is really something that's publicly disclosed, and all of our investors know of it. We have the lowest upstream carbon intensity. We have the lowest scope 1 and 2 emissions of any major oil producer in the world. We also are, if you look at all the emissions from our production and from our products, we're also one of the lowest intensity producers anywhere in the world. And because of this position, we are very comfortable in the fact that the decades of investment, the decades of reduction in flaring, of energy management, of best-in-class reservoir management practices, where we produce for every 3 barrels of oil, 1 barrel of water, whereas the rest of the industry produces a barrel of oil with 3 barrels of water. We have been able to really achieve what I consider a benchmark for everybody to follow in terms of efficient and low intensity production, which we believe will continue as we set our eyes on the future. We will continue to be the lowest cost producer, but also the lowest carbon intensity producer. And COVID has cemented the importance of really being differentiated and being in a class of our own in this area. And I think we will continue, of course, to give this utmost urgency and importance, and we will continue to invest in technologies that reduce our emissions further.
Okay, great. And from the outside and looking in on Europe, I would love to talk about targets. So many of the European majors are setting out plans for reaching net zero by 2050. Appreciating the fact that you're not governed by the Green Deal that's going on by the European Commission, are targets key to your strategy, or do you think it's difficult to set targets so far out?
So, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, we are currently the lowest carbon intensity producer. Target will be to remain the lowest carbon intensity producer. We understand that a lot of the international oil companies, of which we are partners with in the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, they're looking at different models and different business measures that will allow them to reduce their emissions. We believe that we can stay the course. We can continue to be the world's leading oil producer. We produce 1 in every 8 barrels of oil globally today. And we can do that while still retaining and maintaining a very low carbon footprint and low carbon intensity, and continuing to invest in technologies. Part of our investment is through the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which we were founding members of. We've invested actually collectively between us and the IOCs that are members of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, $1 billion to kickstart technologies that and projects that address carbon capture, utilization, and storage, methane management and mitigation, and energy efficiency in transport and industrial applications. And in addition to the $1 billion that OGCI is actually utilizing for investment in technologies and projects, collectively, each of our companies is also investing heavily in technologies that reduce emissions across the board.
And with these technologies, can you let us know the key areas that you're looking at? I know you mentioned CCUS there as well.
Absolutely. The first area that we're interested in is crude to chemicals, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that later. The next is non-metallics technology. We're also looking at sustaining oil-based transport and really improving the efficiency of the internal combustion engine. But we're also looking at hydrogen as a low emission fuel for multiple applications. And finally, we're looking at, as you mentioned, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, where you can actually convert CO2 emissions into value, but you could also mitigate and reduce the emissions from the hard-to-abate sectors by storing those CO2 emissions under the ground.
Okay, so let's take them one by one. So could you expand on the crude to chemicals side?
So Sandal, crude to chemicals, and it's been a technology that we've highlighted in several WRA events, including the Middle East Refining Technology Conference in Bahrain, which I've been fortunate to be a member of the organizing advisory board. Crude to chemicals was a major area, but I can assure you that the pioneer and probably one of the leading companies in crude to chemicals is Saudi Aramco. We're developing technologies that allow you to bypass the refinery, that you make it a very simple step from crude with a simple separation into a few fractions, and then, or basically separation and treatment of the whole crude into producing upwards of 70% chemical feedstock, and the byproduct is fuels, and which is very different than most refiners, where fuels are the major product and chemicals are a byproduct typically. Sure. So this technology can cut capital expenditure by almost 30%. It can really result in reduction in emissions from the process itself, because you're bypassing a lot of the steps in the refining process in a complex refinery. But most importantly to us is that you are now tying up the hydrocarbons in oil and putting them into chemicals and materials, and thereby sequestering it. So you're actually eliminating the emissions that are produced from burning a fuel by putting it into a more valuable material and product.
Okay, and then thank you for that. And you mentioned non-metallics as well.
So non-metallics is an initiative that we've been also pioneering. In fact, it is high on the agenda of our company leadership. We've been looking at key applications for non-metallics. Non-metallics are really polymer composites, carbon fibers, and others. And these materials are, I could tell you, they're advantageous over steel, for instance, in that they're more durable, they have longer lifetime, and they're less they corrode a lot less. So you can actually lay down pipes that will last a lot longer and require a lot less maintenance. So in fact, the company has laid thousands of kilometers of pipes, and we're also developing new non-metallic materials for the oil and gas industry. And part of that is being developed in the Non-Metallic Innovation Center that we established with the Welding Institute in Cambridge, United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And we have several partners, oil and gas companies and technology developers, as well as academic institutions in the UK and outside, that are partnering with us in really expanding the envelope of non-metallic applications in the oil and gas. So making pipes that are have higher temperature, pressure, and diameters tolerance. The other areas we're looking at is applying non-metallics in construction, in automotive sector for making lightweight materials for vehicles, but also for renewable energy and solar PV panels, and as well as finding new applications in the packaging industry.
Okay, and you mentioned also the low emissions from transportation. It seems like a very interesting and key point at the moment.
Absolutely, Sandal. Well, of course, as any refiner is aware, transportation is one of the key sectors that the oil and gas industry supports. In fact, 60% of the barrel of crude is utilized in the transport sector. between light duty, heavy duty vehicles, as well as marine, aviation, and rail. What we've done in Saudi Aramco is we've really taken a holistic approach to reducing emissions and improving the efficiency and the performance of the internal combustion engine. We've been looking at cutting edge technologies like gasoline compression ignition. This is a technology that has the efficiency of a diesel engine, but it has much lower emissions because it uses a lighter fuel, but it also eliminates a lot of emissions, the tailpipe emissions like particulates and NOx because of the way that it's configured. This technology is being developed. We're partnering with automotive companies, and some companies are beginning to deploy technology that's based on this technology. And we believe that this can also be applied in transport. In fact, in heavy duty transport, we're now prototyping a truck that has a gasoline compression ignition engine, but also has onboard carbon capture and storage. So we can actually capture 45% of the CO2 emissions from the tailpipe of the truck. We're also looking at technologies that can capture emissions from marine applications, and we're looking at ways of improving the carbon intensity of the aviation sector and looking at new fuels that really can be blended with petroleum-based fuels to reduce the overall emissions.
The final one that you mentioned was the CCUS and also how it complements the production of hydrogen.
Well, hydrogen and CCUS are really two faces of the same coin. We believe that you can produce hydrogen very efficiently if you can capture the CO2 emissions and store them or utilize them. Hydrogen is a complement to our transport technology efforts. We're looking actually, and we're partnering with several leaders in this field. In fact, we just built recently with one of the leading technology companies a hydrogen filling station here in Dhahran, the first in the country. And we brought in 6 Toyota Mirais and Hyundai Nexo, and we're driving them around. People always stop us and they want us to open the hood and let them see the fuel cells that are running them. But we're testing them. We're also testing new technologies for reducing the cost of hydrogen production, reforming it in the station, and really optimizing the whole mechanism for producing and delivering low carbon hydrogen, even for export to markets like Japan and South Korea. I would like to stress that the work that I'm describing is done through our research network, our research centers across the globe. We have research centers in Detroit, in Boston, in Paris, and in Beijing that are really focused on a lot of the transport technologies, as well as Korea, where we're also focusing on developing new technologies for hydrogen production. And we're partnering with leading IOCs, as I mentioned, but also with leading technology developers. In carbon capture and storage, one of the technologies that we've piloted here in Saudi Arabia is, in fact, we've built one of the largest carbon capture and CO2 enhanced oil recovery plants in the world, which injects 800,000 tons of CO2 into one of our fields and enhances the oil production from there, even though we don't need enhanced oil production recovery at that field. But it's really to explore how the CO2 impacts recovery, how it is stored underground, and we monitor really the CO2 capture and storage side of the technology. We're also looking at technologies that convert CO2 into valuable fuels and into valuable chemicals and olefins. And in fact, we're looking at several pilot technologies in that area that really create value from CO2. And we're also looking at technologies that utilize CO2 in sectors that are very high emitting, like cement, for instance. We're looking at capturing CO2 into cement or using CO2 for curing concrete and really reducing emissions tremendously. And this is work we're doing both with OGCI and with our partners in KAIST and others. And we're looking really at capturing up to 20% in some cases, but even higher in some other cases of CO2.
all of these areas of research are going to be a big part of ERTC in Madrid, and so I'm looking forward to you joining us there and expanding on it further. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
No, it's always been a pleasure. I've been working with the WRA for several years, very high level, and I look forward, hopefully, to participating in Madrid and visiting Spain for the first time in my life, or virtually visiting Spain, depending on the situation at the time.
Well, I'm looking forward to either way. Well, fantastic, Bashir. Thank you very much for spending the time with us, and speak to you soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Sam.